Hello, my name's Alex from the Advent Label Applicator Company. This is going to be a demonstration of an Advent 300 labeling all these metal containers. There's 3 different sizes here. Traditionally, metal cans with are difficult with pressure-sensitive labels because they have a ridge and they have a recessed panel area. So we're going to go ahead and see how this works. We already have the machine set up, and we're going to go ahead and demonstrate it. So we have it threaded. We'll do a changeover with some of the other size containers. We don't want to make the video too long. So we're just going to go ahead and turn it on here. See, I have the container, and I just simply insert. Gets guided into the product guides, and you can see a single label goes on. Very, very nicely. This is a good quality label with good quality metal cans, and it looks absolutely fantastic. Perfectly done. And the key features of why this works so well is, first of all, the labels have good clearances from the ridges, which is very, very important. Generally, we want at least a 1/16 of an inch on either side. So that's very important. And then the real standout feature on the Advent machine is that we have rollers that are fully adjustable. So you can move them left and right. And the key part of that adjustment is to make sure that they match the width of the label so they can be supported on the inside of that panel area. So the ridges aren't touching anything. They're free and clear, and that allows that label to go on nice and tight without any bubbles or wrinkles. So let me go ahead and finish these up. Again, probably average about 25 containers per minute, fairly comfortably. It's really an issue of how quickly the operator can insert the containers and then take them out. As you can see here, you look absolutely perfect. No bubbles, no wrinkles, wrapped around there really nice and tight. And that's really great on a metal container with a seam on it. So the Advent did a fantastic job. And we'll go ahead and do a changeover. Alright. So we're going to go to our next size. And let's make sure we got the right label. We do. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do a changeover. The machine's completely self-contained. Doesn't require any air. I just removed the waste rewind system. Another nice feature on the Advent. Takes up the waste paper, and that's automatically tensioned with this mechanical clutch. Just put it back in, just like a little toilet paper. Okay. Let me disconnect the brake arm spring. Let me see if I can get a better vantage point here. Okay, here we go. All right. So we disconnected the brake arm spring. That keeps tension on the roll of labels, prevents it from feeding out. Also allows it to have the label wrapped around nice and tight. With it disconnected, that white strap comes off the mandrel, and then you can move the roll very easily. You just go ahead and flex the guides, and the roll pops out. And remove our guide. Then generally I like to use the other guide to help press off the roll. Okay, we'll put that down here, and we'll grab our next roll. All right. Just want to make sure it's oriented correctly. And this is one of the key elements. When you put a new core, you want to make sure that it bites into one of these clips. You don't want the core moving independently of this aluminum mandrel. That's very, very important. If your labels are being inconsistently fed, that's usually because it's slipping on the core. And that's why we have these clips designed into the core, machined into the core, or attached to the core, to allow it to bite into that fiber core and keep it in place. Sometimes you might have to add a piece of tape or a roll of label, or a label to the inside of the core to help that prevent that from slipping. Okay. So let's get this oriented. Okay. So here we have. Okay. And you can see you have almost about 8 inches to work with. Generally, the rule of thumb is to put the labels in the center line. If you have to make an adjustment, if you want to move it further to the left or to the right, again, you could just slide them. Okay. You want to go under the brake arm system, forward. We have 2 webbing guides that are just moved out of the way. We go forward. We just pull. And we want to remove a couple labels. We have our peel bar that's just designed to pop out. Put the backing material over the peel bar. And then just drop the peel bar back into place. Sharp edge is facing the white tires and towards the back of the machine. Should be nice and even across. Very straightforward. Okay, then we just go ahead and turn on the machine. Then we're going to insert the backing material between that 4-inch drive roller and the 8-inch pinch roller. That's what does all the work on the machine. Just go ahead and insert. And you can see it gets deflected. You can press the trigger. And we could just go ahead and grab the backing material. Find our rewind. There's a slit in there. Just go ahead and wrap it around. And then a common mistake is not to reattach the brake arm spring. If you were to turn on the machine, labels would start feeding out. So go ahead and make sure that brake arm spring is reattached. Okay. You might have a label that's partially fed out. You'll also notice that the labels are pretty crooked. This is a good time to kind of help straighten it out by hand. Move your guides out of the way. Put the overhead pressure arm. Let me go ahead and adjust it so we can see a little bit better. So I'm just going to move it out of the way. Okay. All right, so you can see those are our labels. And then generally we want to turn on the machine and feed out a couple labels to get everything nice and straight. We have a pre-feed timer, which essentially flags the label. That's on the front of the machine. Generally, for most labels, you're looking for a setting of 3. You can see if I hit it to 0, when I press the trigger, the label doesn't feed out. So a setting of 3, and we're going to do this a couple times. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this label out. I can feel there's good back pressure on there. Put that aside. Then I'll press down the trigger. And you can see we're getting about 1/3 of the label to be flagged out. And we're going to go ahead and pull that out. Release the trigger. And then we're going to do that one more time. That allows the labels to center up. And also, we're just going to check to make sure that's consistent. And you can see it's the same distance. And what that's telling me is that the roll of labels isn't slipping on that core. And the machine has good back pressure, meaning that the brake arm is engaged. And that's going to allow that label to get wrapped around the surface of the container nice and tight. That's great. Now if I wanted to, I could increase the back pressure. We have a nice little adjustment here. We have a lever that allows us to adjust the brake arm spring. Let me go ahead and do that just to show you. It's generally on the metal surface, we want to get as much back pressure as possible. You can just see I increased it, have the lever lifting up a little bit, and that just stretches out the spring a little bit more. Okay. All right, so we have that all set up. The labels are threaded to lock my guide here. Now the next thing is to adjust for the container. All right, so So I can see where the backing material is. And I'm just going to aim it. Okay, so I'm just going to hold it in place, move my guides in. And that just kind of keeps the container in place. Next thing we're going to have to do is to adjust for the diameter. This is a slightly, well, it's pretty much the same diameter. It's a little bit larger, so I'm going to separate the white tires a little bit so it sits a little bit deeper. And this allows you to adjust for different diameters by moving the carriage knob. You can go from 1 inch to almost 12 inches in diameter. We also have a removable shoulder here that allows you to do very tall containers like wine bottles or bleach bottles. All right, so that's pretty good. Oh, the adjustment as far as the distance for the carriage knob, usually you just want it hovering over the peel bar by about 1/4 of an inch. If it's too close, what happens is the backing material gets wrapped around the container. If it's too far away, usually the leading edge of the label gets folded over. All right, so I'm going to bring my overhead pressure arm back into play. Standard feature, it allows unfilled or light containers to be labeled consistently. And I'm just going to move the arm. And then I usually like to put in the center line. And then when I tighten up the arm, I'm just going to have a little bit of a gap here on the stop. Usually about 1/8 of an inch. It's perfect. And now that allows us to avoid the overhead pressure arm each and every time. And I could test how things work by just turning on the labeler, turning it to 0, and inserting the container. You can see it's nice and steady, but ideally we should move some rollers back into play. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on the front rollers. You can see we could fit one onto this side and still clear that ridge. You can see if we don't clear that ridge, it tilts the container. So it's really important that we're able to move it left and right to clear those ridges. And then generally the rule of thumb with the rear is you just want to match the width of the label. So we toggle the machine. The white tires in the rear have a set screw, so we can just slide them over. You see that one just fits into place perfectly. And we have a little bit of clearance on the left and right to allow us to do a fine adjustment. They don't have to be all pressing up against each other. You can space them out. You can see that just fits in there really nicely. I can move my guide there to support it on the top ridge. Put my overhead pressure arm down. Take it out. Turn the timer to 3. Insert, and we'll see how close we were. All right, so you can see here, I'm right at the top. So I need to make a small adjustment with my guide. So I like to use the original container. And I'm just going to move the guide over so the container sits higher. And then when you adjust your guides, you want to make sure that they're not too tight. You want a little bit of play, especially on round products, because they're not all going to be consistently the exact same height, so you need to have some wiggle room. You can use that same container. This one looks okay, so I'm just going to leave it and use a brand new container. Insert. And that's just absolutely perfect. Dead center. Again, good clearances, but that label's being wiped around that metal surface. Absolutely perfect. No bubbles or wrinkles that I feel. Just absolutely great. So let's go ahead and finish these up. Just to give you an idea of the speed. Adjust my camera. And here's the last container. Again, just really great. And of course with the Advent 300 we're not using air We don't use a photo eye, so you can use any type of label material, clear, opaque, butt cut, die cut, doesn't matter. We're always going to feed that single label on. And you can hear this is the seam. You can still see it's doing a really great job of stretching that label over that seam, making it almost invisible. So it looks really, really great. We're going to do our final changeover. I'm going to be a little bit faster because I'm not explaining everything. So we're going to take out the waste material, mid-roll change. So I'm going to leave a little bit of the waste material so you don't lose any labels. Pop that out. Put that back in place. Go that way. Release the brake arm spring. Pop the roll of labels out. Release my guides. Take one off. Use the other to slide that roll of labels off. Let me put that down here. Grab my new roll, slide it on, make sure it bites into those clips. Again, add something to the interior of the core if you need to prevent it from slipping, but you can see there it's on nice and tight. Get my other guide, center it up. Back into the wings, just flexes out of the way. Let's see here. Let's get this threaded. Peel off a couple labels. And I just noticed that the die cut on this label is actually pretty thick, deep. Obviously, you don't want to run perforated labels in a machine, any type of labeling machine. But one of the nice things about the Advent is we can adjust the rewind system and the brake system. You can see here I'm threading the machine. Pull it through. Pop out the peel bar. Put the material over it. Put the peel bar back into place. Turn on the machine. I like to make a point. Insert it between those two black rollers. Feed. You can see it deflects automatically to the back. Turn the waste mandrel. Find that slit. Wrap it around at least once or twice, usually twice. Reattach the brake arm spring. Of course, straighten it out as best you can, but this is an opportunity to feed out a couple labels to get everything centered. So turn on the machine. Move these guides out of the way. Press down the trigger. You can see we have some waste here. So this is our first label. Take note, it's feeding about a third of the label. Pull it out. And then go ahead and do that again. Checking to see it's the same distance. Pretty much is. You can feel there's good back pressure there. So the core is not slipping. It looks like we're all set. Now, of course, you can see I'm a little bit off to the left side, but again, you have about 8 inches to work with, so you don't have to be in the dead center and be perfect on your threading. All right, so I'm going to move the overhead pressure arm out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and look at the backing material. Line it up. Bring my guides into place. And that kind of helps me set up where we need to be. Put the overhead pressure arm back into place. This is a larger diameter. So I'm going to move the white tires away from each other. So the container is sitting down a little bit lower. Once I adjust that, I need to readjust my overhead pressure arm. So take my Allen wrench tool. Okay. So just put it in the center line. And then when you tighten it up, just make sure there's a little bit of a gap here on the stop. Make sure it's nice and tight. And then you could run it right now, but you can see that the container is taller, so it's kind of unsupported. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just adjust the supporting white tires. And again, the rule of thumb is just simply match the width of the label. So I'm going to bring these two rollers into play. Slide them over. And you can see there it's a little bit close on that end, but I think I'm pretty close. I mean, ideally you might have to move the container left and right, but your label has so much clearance that that shouldn't be a problem. But if I want to make it perfect, I can slide these four over, and that will give me a little bit more margin on that left side. And then when you're tightening up on these set screws, make sure you tighten up on the flat that's on the shaft. That's to prevent a burr from occurring. Oh, and what we do to the rear, we should match in the front. We have this white tire here that we can slide over. And of course, that should be fine. If I want to separate it or support it a little bit better, I could go ahead and do that. Alright, we're all set. If you want to check your work, you could turn the timer to 0, insert a container, and just see how it spins. You can see we're a little bit close on that ridge right there. So I can move these rollers over just to give myself a little bit more room. And the rear looks good. So we're going to go ahead and feed the label. So I'm going to turn my timer back up to 3. Take the container out to allow the trigger to reset. Insert. Okay. And you can see I was simply too high. So what we need to do is we move the container towards the right. So again, I take the same container, take my guide. Looks like we need to move it about 1/8 of an inch. Slide it over. And then bring the other guide into play. Remember, if you don't want to make it too tight, because if it spins and they're tight, the container will bind. It will stop spinning. So do give yourself a little bit of wiggle room there. Okay. And I'll put this one aside. Grab another container. Insert. You can see. That looks really fantastic. Now this container has a little bit less overall clearance. So this one we can move up just one more time. So I'm going to go ahead about 1/16 of an inch, and I think that will put it like dead center. But that's one of the important things about having margins, is the more you have, the easier it is to make these adjustments. I should also note that we have web guides here. We can bring those into play, and that kind of helps the label lock in place. Grab another container. Go ahead and insert. And you can see, looks really good. Maybe a little bit on the low side. And I think on these metal containers, they're probably not the exact same height. So I'm going to go ahead and grab another one. Move it back down. I think I moved it a little bit too high. But generally, you might need about 3 or 4 containers to get everything dialed in. Or you could just use the one container and label it over and over. And there we go. That's absolutely perfect. And even with that dent there, you can see it does a really nice job. So again, changeovers are going to probably be about 5 minutes the first couple times. As you get comfortable with the machine, probably takes about less than 3 minutes. You can just see, just put the container in, label goes on in less than a second. You simply take it out. So even on this larger label, you should probably still be able to do about 25 containers a minute. So that is the Advent 300, labeling your 3 container sizes, dealing with a recessed panel area on a metal surface, and doing a really fantastic job. If there's any questions, we could reach at 800-846-7716. Thank you.